we've got that. And again, I just want to thank all of you. We are a small and mighty little group here to consider continuing our time hearing from the Reverend CeCee Mills on the common good and generosity and community at the center. So I'm just going to let you take it, CeCee, and we'll go as long as we need to tonight. How's
Absolutely.
That? Thank you.
Yeah, if we finish early, then hey.
Right.
I'm going to start us off with the word of prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Good and gracious God, we are so grateful, Lord, for even the gift of time, for having this time apart to allow your Holy Spirit to open to us the ways in which we are called, Lord God, to be generous, the way that we are called to be in relationship with our neighbor, the way we are to put, Lord, the benefit of our neighbor above ourselves. Help us in this season to see how that translates beyond individuals, but to your church, to your kingdom, that we see ourselves as a part of the community and that we are co-laborers together in different ways for the sake of the gospel. Bless our time together this night. It is in your Son's holy and precious name, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
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 I'm going to start us off with the word of scripture from Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Just yesterday, I was on Facebook, and one of my former friends from a church I served in Virginia had posted about her parents. It was like one of those memories from 5 years ago. And the memory said that her parents went to Walmart and saw a homeless man. So they took the homeless man, they got him something to eat, they bought him new clothes, took him home, let him take a shower and rest in their home until he felt well enough to go on about his journey. And I remember looking at the comments and seeing how many people were warning them that they had put themselves in danger. That was the first response. Why would you do that? Why would you take someone you didn't know? I'm glad it came out okay. I'm glad that he didn't hurt. And that's some of the reality of the dangers of the world that we live in. But I just thought, what a testament to the gospel they were. They were not the ones that posted the story. It was, their daughter who posted the story. But hearing them, that they looked at this person and they saw a person. That they saw the person in their own circumstance without explanation of why they were there. There was no assumption that they were a drug addict or mentally ill or had done something criminally, or there was no assumption. They just saw this person in need. They had a conversation with him. Enough of the conversation moved them that they thought, I just need to give him a little help. I just need to give him a little help. And the story goes that the reason why that they stopped and they helped him and did all of those things was that he had went looking for a job, but people wouldn't hire him because he was disheveled and he smelled. So they said, oh, if that's keeping you from a job, then we will help you by doing this thing. And sure enough, later, they did see him working at the same Walmart where they met him, and he had gotten a job there. Not that everything in life was perfect, but he at least been able to get the ability to be able to earn money. When I hear this text of the Good Samaritan, and Jesus is trying to give them an example of a story that shows them our human nature, that's what I think he was trying to expose. That it's not about the stature of your place in society, but it is truly about the heart of the person that God is looking for. It wasn't about the heritage. So he chose a Samaritan to be the person that acted with their heart in this story so that people could understand it is not about the things that we see and relate to one another where we categorize each other, but it is about having a heart that allows you to love your neighbor, and that neighbor is undefined. It is not restricted. It is not a category. That if you are a staunch Biden supporter, then the Trump supporters are your neighbor. If you are someone who believes that the death penalty is valid, your neighbors who don't believe it's valid are your neighbors. If you are a person who thinks that having something like general health for everybody is something that's bad, then your neighbor who thinks it's good is still your neighbor. That God was trying to help us to see that we are called to be in relationship with our neighbors, and we ought to care not just about their personal health, but their spiritual health. We should care about where their soul finds warmth and love, and that is in the arms of God. So I think as Jesus is telling this story, I think those who heard it could imagine these people on the side of the road walking by and crossing by. And not only that, they could imagine themselves doing the same thing, perhaps literally having done the same thing. And so that what I invite you to do is what Jesus was trying to teach, this idea of having the common good be at the center of who we are. So that as we think about the resources, the things that God has blessed us with, the things that we are stewards over, we see them as part of the common good. Not our own individual silos, but part of the common good, which will change how we see our church evolving, which will change how we understand ourselves to be in relationship with our neighbors. We have a congregation that's on the boundary here, and it's a Cherokee area for Cherokee Native indigenous people. And everybody in that community claims to be a part of that church. They worship probably 30 on the Sunday, but everybody that's in that community, if you ask them, where's your church home? When their family members die, when things come up and they're in the hospital or their crises, they think that's their pastor and that's their church. And guess what? If you ask Pastor Jack, he would say they're right. If you ask his wife, Lisa, she would say that they're right and that they are a part of this community in a way that's beyond our understanding of membership. I do know that there are several congregations already doing that type of work in the Delaware-Maryland Synod. And I would like to just pause here and just give opportunity to share for anybody who wants to share how you've kind of met your neighbor and been in community and relationship with your neighbor in a way that's different than the historical idea of the church. Don't be shy. I'm going to pick on Mark Parker. One of the things that I was amazed at when Mark talked about this particular call is getting those who were in the established ministry to understand the greater communities being a part of who they are. So Mark?
Sure. So I'll just give one example because that's what was asked for. One of the first things we did, because mean, we were kind of starting over as a congregation, and that meant being in relationship with as many neighbors as possible in the broader community. And so one of the ways you do that is you go to places where they gather, to what you might call third spaces, and enter into relation with folks and meet them where they're at and on their terms and on their turf, and just be in conversation. So around here, I mean, this libraries, it's the park, it's schools, but it's also bars and restaurants and places like that. So pretty early on, I started hanging out on Thursday nights at the Laughing Pint, which is just a few blocks away, which is kind of a neighborhood place where there already was established community. And so, they were a little skeptical of this pastor who was hanging out there every Thursday for pub theology, right, for conversations about faith, life, and God. But they listened in and they joined the conversation, or they'd turn around and they'd chime in if they had something to say or they had a question, and eventually they sat down at the table. And, and then, 10 years in, that's a community that is part of exactly what you're saying. It's part of our broader church community. And I function essentially as a chaplain there. So I've done funerals for people from the Pint, and I've married people from the Pint, and I've baptized kids who were born people at the Pint. And when it closed last year, like, we were part of that morning, right? We were part of the story and the community of what made that place special and unique. And so, yeah, that's just one example of kind of a place where we meet people and we engage not on our terms, but on their terms in their space, and have the privilege of being, of entering into their lives. So.
Amen. Amen. Can you think of a way you've lived through that, my dear? Where you connected with the people in the community, your congregation, or? You got it?
Unmute.
Yeah, we just did a parking lot. We did a retrofit of our parking lot, and we got grants from Chesapeake Bay, and instituted new stormwater practices. So our parking lot now is the talk of the town because we've changed our neighborhood with the parking lot. And so we were able, initially they were not very happy with us having the parking lot, but then as we reached out to the community and explained to them, because they did not understand what was being done on the parking lot. But as they got to understand it, they got more receptive and more appreciative of our needs for instituting stormwater practices and caring for our community. So that's one way we've reached out to our community.
That's awesome.
Anka, I think you've got a story about Zion, don't you?
Oh, I just wanted to ask a question.
Oh, yeah. You do have a really good story that I've heard you tell. But go on, what's your question?
My question is, what Mark just said is just inspiring, and I know other pastors who have done that, but how do you make it a congregational effort and not just the pastor being out there and increasing his workload or her workload by even more weddings and funerals and whatnot? How does it become a congregational thing and not just a congregation letting their pastor do that on the side?
Sure. So it's interesting, right? I mean, in our case, at least to start with, it deliberately didn't involve almost anybody from the congregation per se, because the point was to start a brand new congregation, and it was a way to do that. That being said, we did have one super faithful member of St. Paul's who came every single week, and it was really nice to have him at the table because he had a really different perspective, and he was in the neighborhood, right? So he had points of connection with people. But essentially, it's about creating fluid boundaries then. A number of folks joined our church because they came to pub theology first, and then they got involved in other ministries of the congregation. Other people came to worship first and then heard about pub theology and went there. So I think over time it developed into as another front door of the church, right? Or as another entry point into community.
Oh.
He'll come back.
And so rather than means to be connected to this community, you know what I'm saying? Because it easily could have been that. Yeah.
Thank you. And I will say this, it's okay if it's the pastor at first, as long as the congregation realizes if that's where the pastor's going to be spending their time, then they're going to have to not do some other things. That lay leaders are going to have to step up into those positions. So if pastor's been doing the Bible study and instead pastor's going to go sit at the pub, then somebody else is going to have to lead the Bible study. So there has to be a mutual agreement to do that. One of the things that needs to happen is it needs to be authentic. If you take people who are scared to meet the community with you, it's not going to go well. You're not going to be able to develop relationships. And so it may be more important for people to go out who are most comfortable in order to do that. And then that pastor or group of people can help, leaders can help to introduce the congregation and the community people together. I think there has to be clarity in mission before the pastor is free to do that. Because otherwise the congregation will complain, when you're spending all your time out there. If there's an understanding that we're moving into a different area, we're looking at the common good. So we gotta get to know our neighbors. And you can't get to know your neighbors by Google. I mean, that's just the honest truth. So I want to talk about another example that I know about. It's a pastor who married someone that was in the congregation where I grew up. So it's like a once removed type situation. And his name is Kelly Chapman. And what he started, what he did was that at his congregation, he started ended up starting a 501c3. But they went out into the community and they ended up creating almost a community block, a city block that's owned by the church. And what they did was they looked at the community and they saw the assets that were there. They saw the financial possibilities that were there, and they created internships for bike repair and also for baristas. Those are two things that I don't think will ever go away because we're so dependent upon coffee. And in Minneapolis, where this church is located, everybody rides bicycles once it's warm. I think it's because when it's cold, they can't go anywhere. So in the summertime, it's bicycles everywhere. I've never seen so many bicycles. And so they created a separate entity, which they call their Redeemer Center for Life. And the Redeemer Center for Life has a host of partners. I'm going to share that with you so that you can see that when we talk about our neighbors, it's not just what I think most congregations assume are neighbors, which are the people that are needy that we can help, which is a terrible posture to take. And so what they did was they created this relationship with various other congregations outside of the Lutheran tradition, inside of the Lutheran tradition, and a host of partners that included community organizations, nonprofits, for-profits. On their board for this organization, they have someone from the Ford Motor Company as one of their board members, which I just think is just sheer genius to have that as part of the community leader, because they have a deeper ability to affect legislation and all of those things. So there are a host of neighbors, but it started with just who was walking by the church. How can we build a relationship with them? Noticing that the young people had a lot of idle time, finding creative ways to do that. So one of the things they offer pre-COVID is a space for the community just to hang out. There are like cool sofas and bean bags. If the community needs to come together for a meeting, they're able to utilize that space. But it's also a place for people just to come by to have casual conversation drink coffee. You can buy bikes. They also bought up some houses across the street because there was they were receiving gentrification. So this is the list of the board of directors. They were receiving gentrification in their area where people were coming in, buying up the properties cheap to build extra large, beautiful homes that would outprice the neighbors that were currently there. So the church started acquiring property. And so they have some homes in the community to make sure there would be affordable housing, as well as a tract of land that they plan to develop to be sure to keep affordable housing in the area. So they make sure they have partners from the different schools. They have partners who have expertise like an architect. And I just think it's just a great example of how to draw neighbors in together. They also do newsletters. This was the one from September 2020. And their mission is to be in the community. So they had their first gala that was different because they couldn't do it because of COVID, but they still raised $115,000 to continue their programming.
And CeCee, if anyone on this gathering would want to have a conversation to just find out more about how Redeemer did this, do you think Pastor's open to that? And is there a way that you can provide us some contact information?
I will get his permission and provide it.
Thank you. If he's open to that,
So
would be great.
the pastor was Pastor Kelly Chapman, was a friend of mine. He actually retired recently, so he is more available than ever. He also served part-time on the Synod staff. So he has a wealth of information to kind of share about how do you do these things and how do you do it in such a way that it works. There is no magic bean. So you can't just repeat what they did and for it to work. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Let's switch screens here. So I have a question. I just want answers and see what you say. What is your definition of assets? What is your definition of assets? How would you describe that? Assets. I said assets. Just unmute yourself and you can respond.
Location, people, availability, property.
Okay.
I would add time to that.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
skill, talents, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, the gifts of the people in your place.
Mm-hmm. So when you think about that, let's say in the community in which you live, what would you describe as the assets in your community? What are some things that you would describe as the assets in your community?
The people, the programs and activities that they engage in.
Like name some specific people. So like if I were to say like my neighbor Fred who does painting, or I have a neighbor William who does pressure washing, who would be the people? Why do you consider them an asset? Digging a little deeper. Anyone can answer.
Sure. So one key asset at the moment, and has been for a while, is our friend Maria del Rocio Herrera. And she's an asset for a number of reasons. One, she's just an amazingly wonderful person, and she's really great to work with. But she is somebody who's really well connected, especially among other Latino families here in our community, and is an ambassador for us in some way. Like her voice rings out and can carry messages from us or about us to places with authority and with a legitimacy that we wouldn't necessarily have just on our own. And helps to then connect the other direction back, provide feedback and information, or make introductions. So Rocio is just a really key asset for a bunch of reasons there. Plus, she's fantastic. So.
Mark hit on the strongest point, is that when we think of assets, when we're trying to build relationships with community, Finding those informal connectors is really key. And the only way to do that is for you to get to know the community. A lot of times those key people will be kind of protected by the rest of the community, because a lot of these communities have had people come in with superhero capes who have come in for a season and left. And so the trust really is shallow. The expectation is you're going to come here to check whatever box you need to, make yourself feel good, and you'll be gone, but this community will still be here and still standing. So getting to those assets, sometimes it takes some time just to connect yourself and become seen as a part of the community and not a leech on the community. I hope that makes sense. So just for our sake tonight, we'll define asset as a useful and desirable thing or quality. A useful and desirable thing or quality. And so when I shared with you about, getting to know the assets within your area, I want you to think about it in that broad of a way. I think when we think about the Good Samaritan story and we see this gentleman who is broken on the side of the road, our mind does not go to this is a community asset. Our mind goes to, oh, this poor man, he needs to be rescued. Even what the Good Samaritan we saw the Good Samaritan do, we may assume that he was the rescuer. What if the Good Samaritan saw value in this person and knew that the community was better if this person was restored? So his purpose was not so that he could be a hero, but so that this person could experience restoration. There were no strings attached. There were no expectations to that. A lot of times what I hear from congregations when they do things for the community, I'll use air quotes for that, they do it and they expect that they will be reciprocated by the community person that experienced their generosity. So one congregation I worked with, they said, yeah, we do all this stuff. We house the homeless. We offer these meals, but none of them come to church. None of them come to church. And I asked them, what have you done to build relationship with them? What have you done to get to know the person? Or is it simply that you're giving them something and it's quid pro quo? You want something in response. Generosity, where there is a common good, is a different understanding. You're not trying to build up the wealth of the individual church or facility or even the congregation. Your goal is to get to know the community and be able to become a part of the community. Some of the assets that I think are significant are history, legends, and strengths. So history is, what is this community known for? How did it get started? I think I shared last time that the congregation I grew up in, there was a pastor coming to interview at that congregation, which is a biracial congregation. And she came to me and she said, let me guess, it was white flight and this congregation. And so I think I shared that with you before, that it's a intentional, historically Black community that was started intentionally. And was not one where there had been white flight. It had only been indigenous people and African descent people on that land. So you need to know the history. It's a source of pride for this community called Warnesville, that they have that history, that understanding that there were Black houses owners way back in the day, so to speak. Legends. So who are the people in that community that have that strong voice that Pastor Parker talked about? Who are the leaders? Who are the ones that have kind of been around for a while? Sometimes that's our elders, but sometimes not. It's sometimes a community leader who has become really involved. But figuring out who those people are, and then figure out the strengths. This place that you are located in has things that it already has that it does well, or things that it has that are valuable in the way that we talked about assets. And so figuring out those things, finding out those things, is through building an authentic relationship with the community. And we'll talk a little more about what it might look like to build that that relationship. You can't build those relationships unless you are out there in the community, and then that creates a foundation to build upon. The goal, again, is to increase and to solidify and to protect the common good. The goal is not to build a wonderful ELCA church that will survive even if the neighborhood doesn't. It's really about putting that community at its center. So Mark has a good example of a way to connect with the community. The school systems are a good way to get involved with the community. It's not just about going in and making a name for the church, but it's getting to know the principal and the teachers and the volunteers and the students that you're able to help. Even in this time of COVID, there are opportunities to partner with schools.
Mm-hmm.
There are other organizations that are already occurring in that community. Is there a meeting of a cultural society? Is there something that's gathering for Latinx or African descent people that's already happening in that community? Don't go as an observer, go as someone that is trying to connect with the community. The NAACP is one example of an organization where there would be an inroad for you to be able to become a part of that. Is there an informal community? The community I grew up in, Miss Donnell was the head of the community. Miss Donnell lived 2 blocks away from me. Anytime anyone had a death in the family, or anytime anyone had a birthday or a graduation, Miss Donnell would start a card, she would make a card, and then the card would go all around the community. People would sign it and put cash in it. Would put cash in it and sign it, and the card would get back to Miss Donnell, who then would deliver it on the part of the community. The National Night Out, we were doing that well before that became a thing, that the community would come out during the summertime, during a particular time of year. Voting was something that they were very passionate about. But if you wanted to come into that community as a leader of an organization or a faith community, if you didn't know Ms. Donnell, then you didn't automatically become a part of who we were. So there was a natural system that would say when someone came to your door, oh, you need to go check with Ms. Donnell, because Ms. Donnell would let the community know. We did eventually have a print newsletter, but basically at the beginning it was word of mouth. Who are these people who are coming into our community? Do we need to work alongside? And who not? So spending time in the community, listening first. Not coming and say, oh, we're a new church on the corner, or we've been here for 50 years and we were just wondering, how we can be helpful in that way. The assumption being that you are in need and I'm the person that has assets. So again, reimagining assets, understanding that we put the common good at the center. This, I think, is the best way for congregations in urban settings to create sustainability, is by becoming a genuine part of the community. So like Pastor Mark shared, where does the community already gather? Join them, listen. Don't go to a couple of meetings and say, hey, can you come to our Bible study? You're going to actually to get to know your neighbor, to hear, and ask God, show me where you are already at work and help me to hear and to see that. Sometimes it can come in ways that we think are secular. So after you do that, what did you hear and how can you get involved? Coming and being a listener and not actually joining in whatever it is that you hear being done is not going to come across as authentic. It's going to come across as you're trying to meet your own need and to look at how that is. So it's better to get involved than to bring something new. It is better to co-create something new than to solve a community problem. I think that's the posture we like to take as a church. We'll figure out what they need and then we'll answer that need, and they'll know to come to us for that need. And so then how do we become co-creators? As I shared with Redeemer in Minneapolis, they figured out that this bike thing is an asset in the community, that some of the young people already probably had figured out certain things to do to their own bikes, and that this would be something, a resource that would give them the ability to be earners and also to teach someone else. So that by doing the internship, there was a natural system that allowed them to be the new kid on the block, but then later to become the one that was teaching. And so it created this paradigm and this understanding. The community understood itself that that space that was owned by the church was their space.
Well, and what I love that you're saying, CeCee, is what we're saying is that every interaction, both individuals have a gift to share.
Yes.
Everyone has a gift to share. And that is not always the way our Lutheran church works. We feel very good about, helping others. That's really a part of so much of what we do. And even if we get, and I even think about, I know several churches who have been doing some great work. They work with LEAD and some other strategic areas, but oftentimes the question is still, what can we do together, or how can we help? And that's not the question we should ask.
Yeah.
Maybe what can we do together? That's a great question. But
yeah. I like to get people to imagine if someone came and knocked on your door, a cold call, someone you didn't know, and asked you, what do you need? What would be your first thought? Would you think, oh, good, someone's coming to ask,
I'd say clean my toilets, feel free.
Karen, that's what I was about to confess, is that when people say, can I do anything for you? I'll go, yeah, can you wash my car? Or can you pay my car note? Or those things. But if someone that you're not connected to comes to your door and asks you, what can they do? You have no idea where they're coming from. And so you would immediately probably ask questions. Are you with an organization? Did someone send you? Do you know somebody? Do I know you from somewhere? That would be that immediate thing. So it's really important to go out with the sole purpose of connecting with the community before you develop an action plan. Before you develop an action plan to develop the relationship. So whatever action plan you create, the first step has to be getting to know who my neighbor is, what their assets are. You're going to find out the places where there's opportunity for growth, but don't go out there looking to find the need in order to make the relationship. Most people I have found, especially congregations that have like food pantries, that the people are not coming back because, one, it's a source of shame that they are in need anyway, and they wouldn't want to come to a place where people know how much they need to have food. So if you want to have a food pantry where the people who come feel like they are part of the church community and will come to worship, then you need to build community with them so that when they come in, you are building relationship. You are using them in the food pantry to help provide, envision, and create what that food pantry is. If you don't, then more than likely they're going to feel uncomfortable. The paradigm that's created is the haves and the have-nots. And you can, in an effective way, create a food pantry that does the opposite, that uplifts the leaders, that allows those who come in to feel like assets by you building relationship, talking to them, and hearing what their assets are, learning what their assets are by building that relationship, and then thinking about how they can use those assets. So then everything should be, of course, steeped in prayer.
Although, can you go back to your slide? I interrupted you because that was a beautiful slide.
Okay. What's your purpose? To save the church or expand the kingdom of God? And so I think that a lot of times we become self-serving, and by doing generosity through the common good, it helps to keep us focused where we need to be, which is on our neighbor. Jesus taught us to be preoccupied with who's not here. And so by doing that, doing the common good, it helps us to be preoccupied with also, how is my neighbor doing? We can imagine the Samaritan story having been a true story. You know how we get the updates now, we see these reality shows, and then there's like an update a few years later, we checked in to see how they were doing, whether the bachelorette marriage lasted or whatever else it was. But it's something about being able to understand that if I'm better, we're all better. If I'm not well, then we all need to be figuring out why that's not happening if we consider ourselves connected as members of the body of Christ. So I guess I'll pause here just to see if there are any questions or comments.
I'd be delighted to hear from any of you if you feel like, you know, you're trying some of this, but it maybe doesn't feel like quite right. We'd love to hear some examples of how you are going out in the community to try to figure it out, or what your history or legend is in your community. Especially, I think about that with St. Philip's. You got a ton of history and legend in your community. Yeah. So if anyone has that to share too.
Well, at Zion, we have a ton of history, being the German Lutheran Church and the mother church of all the German churches. And it's a history that we're really wrestling with, if it's an asset or a blockage, you know, because the community around us is not very German. So that there's some tough discussions going on as to what to do with that German heritage and if it can be used for ministry today or not. We are working on a German American Cultural Center for the community, so, but it's still so narrow. So what I wanted to bring up is, you mentioned lead, and I wonder if all the discernment that we've done through the lead process might help us to discern where then to get involved in the community, so that the place where we get involved is the place that we discern community need and congregational asset strength and passion. Because is that about right? I mean, we can't get involved in everything, right?
I wouldn't lean into community need. I would lean into community asset.
Well, finding out the need is part of the lead process. That's why I mentioned that. So that, like, what?
Yeah, but you were asking, should you? I'm just
right. And
because we are great at social ministry. Lutherans are great at it. We should continue to do it. That is not a normal way that we get to know our neighbor. We serve our neighbor in that way, but it's not a way that we get to know our neighbor.
And again, Zion has a prime example for that. We have a lot of homeless in the area, so they have this wonderful little group, and they meet about every other week, and they pack hundreds of little lunch bags, and they are handed out every weekday from noon to 1, but they have the sexton doing the handing out.
Oh.
And it's bugged me from day one.
But let me say this too. I think one of the things, again, going back to the fabulous Mark Parker, is that he let the church that was existing be themselves. If that's who they are, if they are not the type of people who go out and take the lunch to the people, then that's okay. You can't drag them along. Hopefully, as things change and shift and they see it, they'll want to become more involved. But you need to have key leaders who are interested in building those relationships and having the conversation with them in order so that the community builds a rapport. And it's not looked upon as just a free lunch. That this is your neighbor saying, hey, how are you doing? I mean, just even that simple question in an authentic way. I wouldn't phrase it exactly that way, because most people, when you hear, how are you doing? You go, fine, I'm good. How's your week been? What was the hardest part about your week?
And
where did you see God in your week? Yeah.
And I'll say, I think it's one of the things that, any mission developer who is really making ministry happen also finds a handful, it might be 2, not even 5, but 2 to start, folks who you can sit and have a personal conversation and even ask them what are their fears about connecting with those folks. Where do you see God in the people in our neighborhood when they come to pick up their lunches? And get just a few people to start to be other than just the sexton, but you have to be willing to have those. You got to be open about those tough conversations. Otherwise, they're just going to continue to be themselves because it's easier, and I get it.
But don't be afraid to find those people that are willing to have those conversations outside of your membership.
It's true.
There are people who have that passion, who have that gift, have that natural ease to speak to people, and it may be outside of that. And I think most of the people who, if they're giving it to the sexton, they're okay with that. And so if you expanded it in a new way, I don't think that would feel like they were slighted, especially if you shared it in a missional way. Say, oh, this is awesome that we are feeding this people. We want to make sure that their lives are full in other ways as well. So we're going to work on building relationship and then have those people to do that. It's not instant. It's not always, if the church congregation is not at that place, it's not instant that suddenly they'll be like, oh, that's a grand idea. That's why I always start out with scripture to give it a biblical foundation, as well as to share how we are called to be a part of this world and to do it that way. And it may take some seasoning to get there. All pastors, all mission developers, I say, if you're not willing to do the work yourself, then you can't really ask your people to do it. You can't ask your people to go out there. There's a particular context that we have where the mission developer, I think before, had been in the role of a senior pastor and has not adapted to the role of mission developer. So if they want to do outreach, she's calling different people to see if she can give them money to go out with her congregation, or I shouldn't say congregation because they're not organized yet, with their mission site. That's a different problem. But being able to have those relationships, I think one of the things that ELCA lifts up, a model that really works, is the one-to-one model, where you meet with someone for the sole purpose of listening, actively listening, not telling your story, just hearing their story, asking them questions to dig deeper, asking the hard questions, paying attention to them when they seem like they are affected emotionally, to dig deeper there. And that's a way that you are able to gain trust in those people to know that you really care. If you start there, if you build there, I've not seen it fail. I've not seen the congregation not be able to establish a rapport with the community, which is the goal, is to be able to have that so that you can put the common good at the center. I read about another church, and I did not have it placed on my slide, that actually bought a Burger King for their community. So they created a separate for-profit entity. See, we get afraid of being a for-profit entity, but that's really the only thing that they care about is whether you're endorsing a particular political candidate. And so when we talk about churches being profitable, it's not problematic. But they created a for-profit entity and bought, I think it's a Burger King, and so that they were able to help people come in, get trained for work, and they also were able to be an employer, significant employer in that community. That doesn't mean we all need to go out and buy a franchise of any particular, but I'm just sharing for that community what they heard, what they experienced, allowed that to happen. They were able to raise people who gained managerial skills, and maybe in other communities they would not even have been considered or overlooked. They were in walking distance from their jobs, so they were able to do it without the problem of having to find transportation and all of those things. God does those things. If we're able to build those authentic relationships by showing us what God's already up to and figuring out what are the assets here and what can we do to be in with them so that we can be co-creators. Co-creators, remember, creating something new with the community. by listening and becoming a part of what they're doing. You may never create a separate thing, depending on how the Spirit moves you. You may always just be part of the larger community experience, but they will gain that trust. And so when those seasons come up, when they have deaths and births and all of those things, they will consider you their church home, which I think was Jesus' ultimate goal.
Well, and I think, oh, sorry, I'll let Bob talk. Bob, did you have something?
I was just reminded, I spent many years in Rockford, Illinois, and had a close relationship with Zion Development Corporation, which they were a downtown church, and a lot of people were moving out and houses were falling in disrepair. And they set up a development corporation that would rehab the houses, train people how to fix them. And it was a not-for-profit, but it managed to turn a profit in that they developed all kinds of apartments and buildings and stuff. And they worked with immigration community, but also those who were down and out, and gave them not only a place to live, but the tools on how to fix up the house. They trained them how to have an employment. And that went for many years, and very successful ministry.
We have a community that's in the end of its season here in North Carolina, who have decided to give their property to a nonprofit. They have a Latinx community that meets in their space too, who has all undocumented membership. And so their earning potential is really, really low. So what they've done is they're going to transform the existing building into a mixed use, where they will have the bottom will be for the worship or the community of faith, and it will also be a community center, so they could use it for like community meals and other things, and then put affordable housing on top. And then they're also going to do some tiny housing on the same track, which is just, so this one community, though it's reaching its end of its season, and this other community is there, but doesn't have the potential to, be able to self-sustain, are creating this new paradigm where the community is going to be blessed by being able to have these homes. But they're also thinking of the undocumented people who can't use the tiny homes because those are through the government. But if they build above, and they could have apartments that they could lease out at their leisure, and to be able to have that. So it's just a wonderful way to continue the legacy, which is what they wanted to happen. They wanted to be able to drive by that plot of land and know that their church had done something that would help the community in years to come. And I think that's a really powerful way to see that, as well as to give this important ministry with undocumented people a chance to continue and to flourish. And the other part of that is that our DEM got them a grant so that now they have sewing machines, so that the undocumented workers who already have some seamstress capabilities, but they can make products that they're able to sell to be able to help to bless their lives. So eating and, those types of things are important. So yeah, it's really good. It's really good. So I'm going to, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if anyone had a chance to read the weekly this week from the bishop, St. John's Pimlico was going to join us, but haven't made it the last 2 times. But they're just opening a resource center, which is going to be open 3 days a week to do some job support, computer skills. Now it is helping, but at the same time, it's also an opportunity to engage with folks and see where their gifts are and how to maximize those gifts so that they have potential. But I also encourage all of us to think about how we might be folks who could work in that community to support them.
They also have art on the walls that is for sale. They're trained like local artists out of the community that can show their work there.
Yeah. So just something to celebrate,
So for homework, I want you to think about these things. Number one, prayerfully choose an asset to focus on. The last homework was to think about what are the assets in your community. Hopefully that was helpful to you. If not, I hope tonight kind of showed you what an asset might look like. Prayerfully choose an asset to focus on. Where do you hear God pointing to or showing after you've done the work? If you don't know your neighbors, don't take the step. After you've done the work and found ways to know your neighbors, prayerfully choose an asset to focus on. If you haven't gotten to know your neighbors, even in the season of COVID, there are avenues that you can pursue to strengthen or create relationships with the community. If you are a person that's shy about in-person relationship, there are a lot of Zoom opportunities to be able to connect with people in your immediate community, to be able to get to figure out who they are, or for spaces that for people who don't have electronic capabilities, there may be some opportunities for some socially distanced in-person ways of being able to connect with people. But just check and see what's already going on, what type of organized activities are there, and even in COVID, how can you become a part of those organized activities? Are people looking out for neighbors? Do you know whether your neighbors are okay? That was one of the biggest concerns in the community I live in now, was that because we were so isolated and kept away from each other, there was a concern, well, how do we know if everybody's okay? And so perhaps there are certain ways that they have been able to create a network that is able to do that. If you don't know your neighborhood at all, it's going to be a little trickier to be able to find out the informal ways that people gather during COVID. But as I shared, pray about it. Sometimes you can just be at Walgreens and the person in front of you will say something that lets you know that they're part of the community leadership and be able to, but you have to be in the community. When I served my first mission development, one of the things that we noticed was 80% of the core group that was existing when I came in lived outside of the 5-mile radius around the center point that we considered for the church. And so because of that, we began doing all of our shopping within the 5-mile radius. So we would go to the grocery store. If you had to go to a library, you went to the library in that community. You began to do things in that immediate community, which gave us casual opportunities to interact with others in our community, if we did not physically live in that community. And so that helped us. We met nurses, we met firefighters, we met police officers, we met the gentleman who was trying to get a law against panhandling removed, but he was out just asking for signatures of people in the neighborhood. We met the people who were our neighbors who did not live indoors. We got to talk with them. We met the ones who lived in the woods across the street from where we worshiped. We met them in the small cafe in the shopping center where they would come in because the owner allowed them to sit and to do different things. We learned who among them, we learned who could play a guitar, who you should go to if you had a medical emergency because of their military service. And we got to know our neighbors and who they were and the assets that they were, and connected with them in such a way that we were able to learn what they were already up to and then become co-creators. We learned from one of them who gave us probably a 30-minute lecture on why you should never pity anyone. And she became the person that when we created a study opportunity at the local library, she's the one who would always give a word of wisdom at the beginning for our young people who came to get homework help. So it's just a matter of, and I understand, of course, person to person is more difficult in COVID, but pray about it. And I have not seen God not provide answers to how can I do this in the season of COVID, to be able to connect with the community. How do you let the neighbors know that you want to dream with them and not for them?
Mm-hmm.
As I shared there, growing up in a community of modest means, we often had groups that would come in and offer us things, and we knew that they would only be there for a season. We didn't expect them to come back. And I've heard that story over and over again. We have a congregation that started out in a school, meeting in a school, and they decided they would lean into that relationship, so they would volunteer and do all of these things. And in their third year of volunteering with the school, someone asked them, how long are you going to be here? By year 5, they had the trust capital that person knew and was already planning things 2 school years away for that community. And now they have a program that offers, I would say, probably 65 small groups before COVID, of course, including things like robotics, building computers, CSI. I mean, it just gave them an opportunity to see things beyond whatever their mind could think or imagine, because there were all of these creative ways to do it. And they also were able to make suggestions about what else could we do? What else could be good to have here? What are you imagining? Which is how they ended up with 65 different small groups, just based upon the participants having the relationship to be able to say, you know what I'm really interested in. So what I would like for you to do for homework, I kind of went over the homework as a teaching element versus sending you out. But what I'd like for you to do is to figure out what's going to be your first step. It depends on where you are. Is your first step trying to figure out a way to get to know the community? Is your first step discerning prayerfully what's the asset that you're going to focus on? What's your first step? Is your first step, you're the pastor and this sounds good, but you have to find someone to journey with you? How are you going to discern that? Do you start by looking at your list of active people who are the most active at your congregation and discerning who has the passion and the energy to journey this with me, to be a co-creator with me, to figure out how do we have these conversations with our community? What questions do you have?
So I was hoping, if anyone wants to ask a question, please do that in this, but I was hoping, I don't want to put everyone on the spot, but we're such a small group and we are here to be a little vulnerable. So I was hoping if each person could just share one thing that they've heard tonight that was either, oh, that's making me wonder, or I don't get it, can you tell me more? Or I got it, I got my plan. So I would just love to hear if each one of you could do that. And if you don't mind, I'd like to start with Anka.
I love the quote that you put up, what is our purpose, to save the church or expand the kingdom? That's great. And I'm probably going to use that because both of the churches that I serve have been very insular until we got there. Even the one up here in Mount Airy, the pastor just really did his own thing and they weren't involved. The one up here, when we started the LEAD process, our biggest challenge was at first to figure out what is our community, because it is so spread out. There is no real town center. There is no village really. We're straddling 4 counties that are coming together. So we really wrestled with this, what is our community? In Zion, they do have community now. They didn't used to have, because they're downtown and there was all office buildings and people left at night, but now there are people living in lofts, young millennials, and then they're also on the other side of the underpass are it's poor people in homeless shelters and so forth. the biggest challenge that and then this is now my vulnerability, is like I would be so excited to do this, and I just have no idea how in the world I'm going to fit that into my schedule, because we're only there 2.5 days a week, and I'm only there every other week, and we don't live there, and none of our people live there, and so I'm like, oh, yet another thing. And the idea of trying to get the congregation on board with giving us pastors the time to invest in that is going to be not welcome, I think. Maybe I'm underestimating them. I hope I'm underestimating them, but right now that's just really scary.
That's why I say you pray about it, because God does amazing things. And if you are convicted in your spirit, which is what I'm hearing, that God has given you this passion and this desire, that you have to trust that, lean into it. However you do your discernment. Like for me, I usually fast. I usually will create a ritual of maybe 7 days where I'm fasting, I'm focused on a particular scripture and listening for God's answer to kind of guide me into what should I be doing here. So listen to God, lean into that. If God is telling you this, well, number one, that was God's plan from the beginning, right? When Jesus came, I mean, Matthew 28 says, go out into the world. So literally, that's who the church is called to be. That we've become comfortable in buildings is a cultural issue, and not a what the word says issue. So I would just pray about it and ask for God to send you the leaders, give you the language to encourage those who are not willing to go out, not to shame them or try to drag them with you, but to encourage them to understand themselves as a part of the common good. And God will do it. And there'll be somebody in there that you will think, I know she's not going for it. And she will, in German, declare to you how we are called to go out there to our neighbors. And so just believe God and trust that. If you ever want a sounding board, I can give you my contact information. Usually I'm a coach as well, so I know how to ask those questions. They kind of get you percolating because it's in you. I can see it's in you. If it's emanating, they'll be just as excited. And what I shared before, it's not adding something, it's pivoting. So it's kind of shifting where you're putting your energy versus, just keep doing the same old thing. And if God is giving you that vision, then I think it will work. If you just give the time to pray and say, God, you may be in a Bible study and you hear something from that person and dig a little deeper and say, can I do a one-to-one with you? Pastor CeCee told me about this one-to-one, where I have a conversation with somebody where I just listen and ask questions. Is that okay if I do that with you? And do that with that person, and you may hear what passions that they have that will lead them to being open and willing to be a part of what you're doing. It's there. You just have to, you just know that God's already done it. Does that make sense?
Thank you. What beautiful, encouraging words. Lynette, would you share one thing you've heard or one question you have, or?
It gave me food for thought about community and your neighbors. Right now, we've been in our house close to 40 years, and I do know my neighbors. Most of us are retired, but Pastor CeCee gave me food for thought, like what did my neighbor do when they worked and everything. I just was so like an extended family, but I really need to look at the gifts that they bring to the neighborhood.
Beautiful. Thank you. Hey, Cheryl, what do you think?
I have to say, the word that's come up over and over in my head while you've been talking, CeCee, is the word kinship. Yeah. Just over and over again. And, for me, and in my little church, I volunteer in our needle exchange, and that's been a great place to just listen and to do those things that you're talking about. Amen. Going in, I'm like this middle-class person, and I knew I didn't have the words to say, and so the important thing was to listen, and that's been remarkable. For me to hear and in time to be able to encourage folks in their way. But as you've been talking, I guess it occurs to me that, you know, I need to know more of the community that I am part of with my church, and I don't. You know, I know the church community, and I know this little part that I've done, and some of the food things of people coming in, but I don't know the larger community. And so, as you've been talking, I've been thinking about ways that I might, you know, get to know other people, those folks that you've been talking about, and also just how we're a small church and my pastor does it all. And it just occurs to me that maybe not all, you know, that's not fair, you know. And so I thank you for your ideas. I love the things that you were saying to Anka. I was just like eating it up. So
Good. Oh, that's beautiful.
When I was in the 4th grade, an organization came to our community, and the lady told me she was going to teach me how to read. And she said, well, not read, but read better. And I said, I took the California Achievement Test, which was a standardized test, and I tested 12th grade, 9th month. So what are you going to teach me? Yeah. So you just got to get to know your neighbors and not make assumptions, no matter how they look or you perceive or you speculate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Hey, Robert, what are you thinking? Because, you know, this is some stuff you think about a lot.
It is. And I appreciate.
I'm gonna let Bob go first, and then go.
Oh, I'm sorry, you said Robert. I'm just going to stand down. Robert goes first.
Thank you. Robert Beekman. Robert B.
So, can you guys hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, great. So the thing that stood out for me, actually all of it, I could sit here and listen to CeCee. It's like the close of my day. And, but I've been able to hang in here and I can listen to you all day. So, because you just, these pearls of wisdoms just flow so easily. But the one that caught my attention, in addition to the whole kind of thinking about the Good Samaritan in a little bit different way. So when you're talking about that, I really picked up and resonated with the whole notion that about taking a risk, about being at risk, and how this is kind of being risky to be able to go out and share in community and to meet new people, basically in a different way, in a different place, and on their terms, or on different terms, not even their terms necessarily. Then the other thing that struck me was, what is our purpose? To save the church or build the kingdom? So, so thanks, CeCee. You done good.
Thank you, Robert.
I already posted that on Facebook, CeCee.
Did you really?
Like, oh, that is it.
I was gonna post it.
You can do it.
That's very good. Thank you.
Hey, Beverly, what's been the nugget or the question for you?
Well, for me, where our church is located right now, there's a new community being built. Well, they're rehabbing some property right at Caroline and Monument that we initially thought was going to be torn down, but they're repurposing it. And we've heard that they're going to be relocating some of the families from the public housing, which is a little further south from us, up to that point. So I kind of think that we'll have to get to know our neighbors, and this might just be our opportunity to know them and to be a part of their coming to the community.
Yeah, and finding out what gifts they have, and that would be beautiful, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. So, Mark, what like resonated for you today?
He said half of it.
Say what?
I said he said half of it because I kept calling on you.
That's all right. I'm glad to share. So we're in an interesting spot because in some ways I don't know, and I don't want to give ourselves too much credit here, but we've been working towards essentially kind of a brand new church plant along within us and among us. So anyway, there's a goal and some intentions and some work being done around Spanish language, exclusively Spanish language. Our current worship service is a mix, but exclusively Spanish language worship and Christian education. And so in some ways it's like starting over again from scratch, and with wisdom gained from what we've done before, but also with trying to be really careful and thoughtful about not falling into some of the traps that we were talking about today. So it was just a good reminder that kind of, as I continue to ponder that about the ways we are working, that we are working with people instead of working for people, that we're serving alongside people and with their leadership, and not just and not just kind of like making our plans and then for other people, and other people. So that was, I mean, that's what kind of, as I've been thinking about this, I'm connecting it, one, reflecting back on kind of what God has done in and through us, and then being really thoughtful about this kind of next step and the things we're working on. So.
Great, thank you, Mark, and thanks for that reflection. So, Bob Driver Bishop, what's been the piece for you today?
Well, once again, Robert, I apologize. I didn't catch your name, and didn't mean to jump ahead of line here. I have a passion for outreach. As CeCee mentioned, I helped started 3 missions. Most recent one I did in Illinois and called Rob James, his first call out of seminary.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've worked with some pretty high energy people. I currently work with doing interims now. And as Karen knows, spirituality and people's talents are very much something I'm very interested in. I actually did a doctorate in spirituality in Chicago when I was there and have continued that trajectory. In recent years, I've been looking for ways to connect with communities and help people grow, but at the same point, use as an opportunity to help share with them some elements about the faith. And there are 2 things that I've been working with, and that's been Strength Finders and Enneagram. Pre-COVID time, I was able to share some with Karen, but and actually with my current interim, I was planning to do all kinds of work in the community, but COVID, you know, and the current inhabitant of the White House gave me a hard time. Anyway, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. But I still believe there's something there, because I work with other coaches and people who work with this, and it's very helpful for people in their own journeys in everyday life, their spirituality, and the relationship with others. And I just look forward to other opportunities to find ways of engaging with people in a way that kind of edifies them. And that's the best of both worlds. So, CeCee, I'm just inspired by all you've said, and thank you for taking the time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob.
So, Scotty, what have you heard today?
Not too much, because I'm having problems with my computer.
Oh no!
It's like in and out. But
okay.
I'm just thinking about how to step into that leadership to learn how to talk to people, because I'm not much of a talker. I don't know. And I can't get questions out, and I get them out wrong, and it's hard to talk to some people. I do a lot of hello, which I shouldn't. I should get to know them more better. And it's my community here in Mount Washington. It's not very large, I think. But around me in the cul-de-sac that I live, we all know each other personally. And I would like to know them more better. If I could just answer the right questions, how to answer them and how to say them. I'm originally from Hamden.
Well, you know, one of the things I'm thinking, Scotty, and with Cheryl is, you know, that might be a beautiful activity with your generosity team to think about what are some of those good questions that are simple, that all you have to do is ask a simple question, and then, Scotty, all you got to do is listen. But it's not always easy to know what those questions are, and it helps to practice them even with each other and listen. And that might be a really helpful way for all of you guys who are just so engaged in this generosity work at St. Luke's to become more comfortable, so you can just go sit at the cafe or at one of the restaurants in the area and just sit and ask the bartender a question and wait to see what they say.
And
Yeah.
Scotty, you don't just have to do it by having a cup of coffee and only having conversation. If there are things that you like to do, find a group that does the things that you like. You know, pre-COVID, it could have been like bowling or going to a play or something where you're in their presence, and don't try to figure out what the magic question is. God is there with you.
Yeah.
And it's not about you knowing the right question. It's just about being there. So the fact that you're there with them, you will get to know your neighbor. Yeah,
Sitting on a bench in the park.
absolutely.
Well, the girls next door that live next to us just got a 6-month-old puppy, Boston Terrier.
See?
There's probably a good, because I have a dog too. She's 9 years old.
Yep.
Yep. Beautiful.
I even had to talk about dogs.
Yes.
Husband's sister is a breeder. I know some things. It's that kind of group we don't have that much around here, and I can't. We have dog walkers, but they're all spread out and nobody's together. So I told Michelle that we would try to get the dogs together that we could take walks.
That's great.
Might be the chance to me to get to know them better.
Right. And then who knows who might see you, and you can talk to the next person, and, you know, as you go for a walk. That's
Puppies
beautiful.
are great for breaking the ice. Everybody likes to talk to puppies.
Oh, yeah.
Scotty, it does not have to be hard, sweetheart. It does not
Okay.
have to be hard. It should be fun. If you're living into what God has called you to do, it should be fun. So don't overthink it.
And after all, you studied dogmatics at seminary.
For orthodoxy.
I want to hear from Regina. Regina, what have you heard? What's meant something to you today? You got to unmute, my dear. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
Sure
Yes.
can.
Well, when Pastor CeCee was talking about her experience in the community where her church was located, you know, utilizing some of the resources or frequenting some of the resources in the community really made sense to me. When I was working, I used to places in the community. I was formerly a teacher, and so going to the stores or the little corner stores or restaurants in the area, that did afford me some time to see some of the parents and some of the, you know, other persons that lived in the community, find out about some things that they were concerned about, you know, and just seeing if we could work together to get some of those things worked out. We were a community school, and they did a lot of rehabbing in the area where they did move people out and promised that they could come back. However, with our community school leader, he was able to bring the people, bring some of the members of the community in, and some of those persons that were leading this charge to rehab the neighborhood, to find out some questions and answers, to find out what the persons in the community wanted, and if those persons in charge of this rehab could deliver on those. So in those meetings, I was able to find out, you know, even more about just what the concerns of the community were, and also just how they felt about different things. And I felt that was a good experience for me. And I think the same can happen. You know, Beverly mentioned that, you know, a new community was being developed, but just going to like the shopping center, the market, even to the library, and of course the fast food places. You can meet a lot of people and just find out just in talking or seeing them, you know, what they're about and how, you know, we can connect.
That's perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you guys have, thanks very much for all of that insight, and you've given us a good sense of what you're thinking next, and we really appreciate hearing that.
Absolutely. So again, the homework is not heavy, but I do hope that you're able to do it. Again, God just surprises you if you just kind of lean into what God is doing. I do have a strategic mapping plan that I'm going to give to Karen to have her send out if people are interested. I was hoping we'd have some more groups today so that we could kind of work on those in our time here, but that's okay. The people who were supposed to be here are here, and we had a good time in the Lord, and so I'm grateful for your willingness to steward your time and allow God to kind of work us through this new idea or new way of thinking to some of us, and a familiar to some of us way of looking at stewardship for the common good.
So I'll get out an email to all of you, plus anyone who had registered who didn't make it tonight, and it will have the recording and the presentation and the documents CeCee's talking about, plus a reminder about the homework. But most important, you might have noticed that we are hoping, even if it's just this mighty group, that you join us again on November 5th. It is same time, 6:30 to 8 for CeCee, and she'll continue these conversations and talk a little bit about creating sustainability. And we'd love for you to come with any stories or examples of what you do between now and then.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It's been great to see you.